Toronto is a city of 630 square kilometers, with 158 neighborhoods and more than 3 million people, each with their own story to tell. This is For the Love of TO with Brad Bradford.
Hi, everyone. I'm here with Lucy Hargreaves. Lucy is the co-founder and CEO of Build Canada, an organization that's leveled up and punched through over the past year, providing advocacy and ideas on behalf of Canada's entrepreneurs. Lucy also has experience working in the tech industry, in government, and on sustainability and climate issues. She's the founder of Canada Spends and advisory board chair for Patch. Lucy, thanks so much for joining us on For the Love of TO. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Brad. It's great to be here.
And it's great to have you here in Toronto because I understand you reside in our nation's capital, a little bit further east in Ottawa, but you come into the city from time to time for all the important work you're doing.
I do. And I actually, when my family emigrated to Canada when I was 8 years old, we moved to Oakville. And so I grew up just outside of Toronto and did my undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto. So I know Toronto well, but haven't lived here myself for many years.
Okay, well, it is great to have you back. And, there's certainly no shortage of folks in the GTA that make the daily pilgrimage into the city, fraught with frustration sometimes. But, we're always happy when people are here in Toronto. I want to talk about Build Canada because this is something I've been following for months and months and months, as many listeners have. But let's get everybody on the same page. Build Canada. Who are the builders and what are we building?
Yeah, so Build Canada is a mission-driven, nonpartisan movement to make Canada the most prosperous country in the world. That is our raison d'etre. That's what we're focused on. And we are doing that in three ways. We are basically organizing a constituency of growth, or a constituency for growth across Canada by bringing people together in real life for in-person meetups, events, reading groups, barbecues. We're engaging our volunteers through a number of digital projects that have a civic action bent to them. So we've developed things like the world's first AI member of parliament that ingests all of the bills that are introduced into the House of Commons and automatically analyzes them from a pro-growth lens and sort of shares what their perspective is and whether or not they would vote yes or no for this bill. We've developed Canada's first interprovincial trade barrier tracker that looks at all of the 33 different trade barriers that we have across the country and automatically updates Canadians on the progress that governments across the country have made in breaking down these trade barriers. We've developed an outcomes tracker that automatically analyzes the progress that the federal government is making on promises that it has made. So we engage volunteers in a number of these digital projects. And the third thing we do is publish bold, actionable policy memos at the federal level to try and get really interesting ideas out into the public sphere that are sort of sponsored and authored by some of Canada's leading entrepreneurs.
So I love that. That's a lot there. I'm going to go back to the first sentence that you said, which was it's a movement.
Yeah.
That you could describe things in a lot of different ways, a coalition, an organization, stakeholder group, whatever. But you said movement. Why is Build Canada described to you as a movement? And is that reflective of the people who are getting on board, how they get on board, what they're trying to achieve? Why is it a movement?
Yeah. So the theory of change behind Build Canada, and this is part of the ethos of what, myself and others who were involved in starting Build Canada felt like. We were very frustrated by the lack of progress and the lack of bold, courageous, ambitious decisions that not only the federal government, but also multiple levels of government across our country. We don't see a lot of ambition. We don't see a lot of courageous, bold decisions a lot of the time in politics. And we were frustrated by that. We considered lots of different options. Certainly, like there's a lot of groups in this country that lobby for their particular views and perspectives. And, from my perspective, I think lobbying can get you some short-term wins on a specific issue. But I think what we're trying to do at Build Canada is really shift the narrative and the mindset of political leaders in our country to be more courageous and ambitious and focus on growth. And the only real sustainable way to do that is to change what Canadians are asking for at the ballot box. Until pro-growth ideas and a pro-growth mindset show up in polling that political parties are doing, I don't think we'll see political leaders make those decisions that will lead us to that pro-growth future.
So it's a movement because you're really trying to identify priorities, shift people's mentality and mindset about what's important to this country, bring them on board. And then the hope is politicians and elected officials at different levels, governments, public policy makers pick that up and then actually find the courage, as you described, to implement the sort of changes that would reflect that.
Yeah, if you have a large enough coalition of individuals asking for the same thing and pushing in the same direction, in this case, growth, that's when you'll actually start to see some real change happen.
And so you're one of the co-founders. This what's really amazing about Build Canada is just the traction that you guys have been able to achieve, the doors that have been opened, the people that you're meeting with, the folks who are involved. It's quite an impressive sort of build, pardon the pun, that you've been able to put together. But this thing just started around the last federal election. Is that where this came from?
We started in January, sort of like late December, early January. Really came out of like a whole bunch of different conversations that many, many different people were having in sort of separate chat groups, separate rooms, in person, just with a frustration that it felt like we weren't going in the right direction as a country, and that we weren't being bold enough and ambitious enough and focused enough on growth. So, yeah, a bunch of us were talking and we decided, hey, why don't we do something about this rather than talking and complaining? And so, really, the genesis for Build Canada came out of this desire of a whole bunch of people who are high agency by nature wanting to actually contribute to the conversation. And so, Build Canada version 1.0, that kind of ran from February up until the federal election, was really focused on publishing these actionable policy memos with big, bold ideas on how to shift the direction of our country.
And that's when it first came on the radar for me, was just a cachet of policy proposals, from immigration to natural resources to infrastructure, finance, tech, all this sort of stuff. And you just dropped it one day on the internet, and it was out there for everybody to see.
Yeah.
What was the process like in terms of identifying what the priorities were for a growth agenda in Canada, and how did you find, or what's the process for the authors to come forward and say, "Hey, I could write a piece on that"?
Yeah. I mean, partly organic, partly chaotic, partly just, some people just have been very passionate about some of these ideas for a long time. Um, so I think if I tried to describe a process to you, it, it wouldn't be something that would be, yeah, the process for each one was a little bit different, but
Not linear.
it's not linear, exactly. But our requirement for each of these ideas is that an idea had to sort of substantially contribute to the GDP of the economy. That was sort of our bar that we set. And the individual sponsoring the memo had to be somebody that, had built and scaled a significant size business in the country. So we wanted those voices to be the voices sponsoring and sharing the memos. And so we selected a bunch of different ideas um, using that criteria. And, our process beyond that, like, and we've said it publicly before, we leveraged AI to help us with research and some of the writing of these memos. We also had a number of very seasoned policy experts in our network who reviewed the ideas and the memos and kind of validated and in some cases challenged, and we changed what we were describing. Um, and then, yeah, we had the, sponsors and supporters who would share their ideas and their views and then attach their names to the memos, which, like, when you put all of that together, enabled us to move incredibly quickly with a very small volunteer team. Build Canada, up until June, was 100% volunteer run. And so it enabled us to move quickly, leveraging modern tools, but also relying on existing expertise in our network.
That's super smart way to do it. How has this been received by government? Because you sort of described the genesis. It was coming out of frustration of the what I would call the previous federal government, perhaps. Maybe not the government specifically, but the direction of the country. Of course, the government's in charge, so take from that what you will. But it was a pretty interesting election, right? If you rewound back to last fall, the outcome seemed certain. And then things changed quite significantly. And now there's a new government that's a different version of the
Yeah.
previous government. So, how was that received by, um, the different campaign teams? You're nonpartisan, so I'm assuming you're putting this out there for everybody.
Yeah.
But did people like it? Did they find it?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, when we like this was an experiment, right?
Yeah.
Build Canada was, and like in many ways still is, a project, and that's how we think about it. And when we started publishing these memos, like, we didn't actually know what to expect. In true startup entrepreneurial project fashion, we were testing an idea, and we didn't know if this thing would be influential or if anyone would care, or if people did care, who would care. But the surprising thing to us when we put these memos out was that not only did we get a ton of traction across both major political parties. So we had inbound outreach come to us from both political parties during the election. And in fact, many of the ideas and the language that we use to explain the ideas were adopted by both parties in different ways in their platforms. Not all of the ideas, but some of them showed up. Um, and so that was incredible and unexpected in many ways. But the other thing that happened that we didn't expect was that, in addition to kind of political and policy personas, we also just had a whole ton of young people and entrepreneurially minded individuals who also care about the future of Canada, kind of reach out and want to get involved and want Build Canada t-shirts and merch and hats and all this kind of stuff. And so that's sort of where we started to realize, maybe there's more here than just publishing policy memos. Maybe there are the seeds of something bigger that we could potentially play a role in organizing and facilitating.
That's where some sharp ideas sort of evolve into more of a movement.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I've seen that too. There's a lot of young folks, I don't demographically people in that sort of Gen Z millennial
Yeah.
space that also want better for this country that are picking up these ideas, they're contributing to it, they're adding to it, they're sharing it within their networks. When you are building something really quickly, as you described, and it's a bunch of volunteers, it can be a little bit chaotic.
Yeah.
How do you effectively harness that energy and that momentum to keep everybody rowing in broadly the same direction and harnessing that energy and turning it into action?
I think we're still trying to figure that
Yeah.
out. I mean, we are thousands of members now. And I say members, we don't charge a membership fee, but these are people who have joined Build Canada and
Self-identify.
they're self-identified. So it means that they've given us their name and their email address and their postal code. And we're growing kind of 10 or 15% week over week. So we're growing very rapidly. And when you look at who those people are, it's mostly 18 to 30-year-olds um, in major urban centers. And it's exactly this demographic that you're talking about, that it's young people who care about the country. And I think the reason the message is resonating with them is because they actually have the most to gain from Canada getting it right, and they have the most to lose if we don't get it right. These are people who, are in university or college, just graduating, thinking about their future, thinking about what they want to do, thinking about the disruption of, technology like AI, can't afford housing, all of the struggles that we talk about, that young people are facing these days. And I think they're looking the message that we're providing at Build Canada, that if you are a high agency and, um, you know, want to lean into some of these big, bold ideas, we actually can. We have all of the ingredients in this country to be the most prosperous country in the world. We just need to lean in and put the ingredients together and be very ambitious and do it in a way that, helps us grow together.
It's cool to watch because a lot of people historically, I think, write off young folks, say they don't engage, they don't show up, especially when we talk about politics. You can cite a couple of elections where there was a big youth turnout, Obama in '08, Trudeau when he legalized marijuana.
Yeah.
But historically, I think the conventional theory is they sit on the sidelines. And yet your point about younger folks actually have the most at stake
Yeah.
in our city, in our country, because they got the most runway in front of them.
Yeah.
So, is it because you're doing this largely on digital where, there's more people and more eyeballs that are seeing it versus sort of traditional media? Like, why were you able to sort of tap into where they're at? And so many people have tried to do that, right?
Yeah.
Who are actually doing it. You're doing meetups across the country and
We're
they're
we're
sold
launch
out.
well, we're launching between 10 and 15 campus clubs this month alone, and I can tell you the appetite for this is overwhelming. On X a couple of weeks ago, I put out a post to kind of test the idea of
Mhm.
campus clubs to see what kind of response we would get. I was overwhelmed by DMs after I put that out. And within 2 or 3 days, we had several leads at 10 to 15 campuses across the country of people who had contacted us and said, I want to start the Build Canada Campus Club on this campus.
So maybe it's less about like how you're doing it, although that's part of it, and it's more about where people are at right now in the country and how they're feeling about, maybe their prospects, maybe where we are, but also that sort of hopeful ambition and aspiration
Yeah.
of where we could be.
People want hope. Like
Yeah.
they believe in the vision of Canada, and they believe in what Canada can be, and they don't want to sit on the sidelines and complain. They want an optimistic, hopeful message, and they want a way to participate in that. And so what we're trying to do at Build Canada now is figure out, like, what do we get these people to do? Like, what is that way that we get them to participate? And we definitely have ideas and we're testing and, we're seeing what works. But, um, that it does strike me that people are latching on to that hopeful, optimistic message combined with some sort of way to participate and contribute.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, Part of your background and your journey, you were a director of operations in the minister's office and you were a chief of staff, you were around the finance department. So you're plugged in from a policy side and from a government side, staffer side. Is there ever a disconnect between some of the founders, some of the entrepreneurs, the builders that are putting these policy positions together and running up against the sort of machinery of government? Are you sort of an interface where you say, well, that's like a great idea, but here's the roadblocks? Or is the mentality just like, get rid of the roadblocks. We just need to drive relentlessly towards this outcome?
Yeah.
You would have a perspective that probably a lot of these
Yeah.
people involved don't have.
Yeah.
And what's that like in terms of putting things that are practical forward that could actually be done and achieved in a mandate or a cycle versus, putting the goalpost out there in a really aspirational way?
Yeah. I mean, look, there are definitely roadblocks that exist, and I've said this publicly before. One of the main issues that we have as a country is there's too much friction for people to get things done in this country, whether that's you're a business, an entrepreneur trying to scale your business, and work with government. There's a lot of friction there. So there are roadblocks for sure. I think, we'd be better off if there were more ways for business leaders and entrepreneurs and policymakers to interact with each other and understand each other's perspectives. But I think ultimately, to get to where we need to go as a country, we we fundamentally need to shift our mindset, and by our mindset, I primarily mean like the government's mindset, um, from a default no reaction to most things to a default yes. And what I mean by that is instead of looking at a proposal or a new idea and listing the 5 or 6 or 10 reasons why that particular idea could never happen or why it's difficult, if we were able to look at what do we really need to put in place to make our economy more globally competitive and to make Canada the prosperous nation that it can be, and then work backwards from that and say, okay, well, what are the policies that we need in place to do that? And figure out how to say yes to those things and how to make those policies happen rather than seeing an idea and listing all of the reasons why it's difficult and then not tackling it.
The default position so often is just like, well, let me tell you all the different reasons why that's not going to
Right.
work versus, okay, like these are challenges. This is how we unlock that because
Yeah.
we believe this is the way to go.
And there's lots of reasons why lots of things don't work in this country.
Sure.
We've election cycles, incentives of elected officials. We've got our federalist system, which makes working between provinces sometimes very challenging. There's different interests at stake. There are lots of challenges, but I think we need to move beyond using those challenges as reasons to not move forward and get really laser focused on how to get things done. And if we fail at that, I think we honestly fail as a country because the world is moving on and if we're still having this conversation 2 years from now about why we can't get major projects built or why we can't, have more competitive tax regimes for our businesses, and we can't, bring in highly talented individuals within a month. It's taking us 18 months. Like if we can't figure that out, I think we're going to be in a really bad spot.
It's a shift in mentality and a recognition that, Canada as a country, Toronto as a city, we got to pull up our socks and we have to compete. Like you are competing for global talent,
Yes.
for investment, for innovation. We want people to build it in Canada. We want them to build it in Toronto. But if we don't have policy, if we don't have a government framework, if we don't have the supports in place to unlock that innovation,
Yeah.
we're not going to be competitive. And our goal should be to build it here. Our goal should be to compete and win in other jurisdictions.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if like government historically has really been set up to have that sort of mindset when we think about these things.
Yeah. And being nice is not we have you know, an identity as a nice culture and a polite culture, and that just doesn't cut it. The world is a highly competitive place right now, and we need to compete on that stage, and that means making decisions much faster. It means being, laser focused on competitiveness and what that actually takes, and it means, being ambitious and not being afraid to just make hard choices. There are many decisions that our governments at multiple different levels have to make that are going to be unpopular with certain groups that maybe an elected official wants to, um, you know, have them happy with a decision, but uh, it's it's going to take some very hard, bold choices to get where we need to be.
So let me pick up on that. What is it about elected officials, political leaders that so often default to a position of status quo, that so often default to a position that is, you know, uh, more reflective of trying to appease everybody rather than maybe, cracking some eggs, taking a stand and pushing us in a different direction? Is it really just scraping the bottom of the barrel for votes? Or is there something about our process with engagement, with the media or stakeholders, that encourages them to do the safe but perhaps less ambitious, less effective
Yeah.
thing? You've been in it, like you've seen it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, I've never been an elected official, so I don't want to throw rocks on the sidelines. And I have a lot of respect for people who put their hands up and run for elected office. It's not something I've ever done. So I don't want to sound cynical about it. Um, I think in any in any situation, whether it's politics or in business, you always have to look at the incentives. And if you look at the incentives, you can typically predict the outcomes. And the incentives for elected officials, in most cases, maybe not all, but most cases, are to get reelected.
Mm.
And from the minute somebody is voted into an elected office, most of the time, not all of the time, 9 times out of 10, that person wants to get reelected. And so they are going to be incentivized to do things and deliver things that are going to make their base happy
Mm.
and to enhance their chances of reelection. And those things sometimes are the same things that are the right things to do that will grow the economy. And sometimes those things are not the same things. And so you end up in situations where perhaps politicians are making different choices that are more focused on sort of short-term outcomes than the more difficult, bold choices that are needed for longer term outcomes.
It's that idea that, I think too many people go into politics because they want to be politicians rather than going into politics because they want to do something.
Right.
You have to have a mission and clarity and focus about what you
Yeah.
want to do and then work
To
really.
be someone rather than to do
Yeah,
something.
yeah. And so how does Build Canada create the incentive? Is that part of the movement thing? You're changing this sort of narrative and
Yeah.
encouraging.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like if an elected official, like if you imagine a scenario in which there's an organized constituency for growth in Canada, the mindset of the population has shifted and most Canadians are supportive of pro-growth, bold policies, then that changes the incentives for an elected official. It actually aligns the incentives with an elected official getting reelected and making pro-growth policy decisions. If somebody can get reelected by being bold and courageous and leaning into growth, then that's, from Build Canada's perspective, that's great for the country.
Do you have a role in sort of taking it to the dinner table for people? And what I mean by that is we talk about a prosperity agenda. We could talk about improving our efficiency, growing the GDP, all these sort of things that you might turn on, um, Business News Network and hear pundits talk about. But
Yeah.
for a lot of people here in the city, and I think more broadly, like it's safety in their neighborhoods, it's safety on the TTC, it's the cost of living,
Yeah.
it's congestion, traffic jams, transit that's not reliable. So how do you connect the sort of broad growth agenda, which is super important for our country and for
Yeah.
the city, with those day-to-day issues that might resonate with someone you're chatting with at the hockey rink?
Yeah. It's a great question. I'm not sure that we've done that perfectly at Build Canada yet. A lot of the issues that we've published memos on at the federal level have not been framed in that way. They're framed more for a policymaker audience rather than like an everyday person audience. So I think it's a great idea. I think we should try and figure out ways to do that more. Because you're right, and most people in their daily lives are thinking about, can I afford my rent or my mortgage payment? Can I, like, if you're a student, am I going to get a job after I graduate? Property crime and crime rates, as you said. So, um, I think it is important to frame things in that way, but we haven't cracked that nut yet.
They're totally related, and this is going to segue into the next sort of section here. But the way we attract, the way we compete and attract international investment and talent and growth, and even interprovincial, is by taking care of those basics in the city, making sure it's a safe city, it's a beautiful city, it's a city you can get around in, that you can raise a family and build a business in. Satisfying those basics is super foundational to competing and attracting talent that's looking around the world, and we want them to come here. So it's not such a stretch. But I think what's interesting now is, we had a federal election, you guys were super involved, your stuff was reflected in policies and platforms, but now you've just launched something more local. And as the name would suggest, it's Build Toronto. That's actually launching. It's just launched a couple weeks ago. And you're grabbing people and bringing them together. What was the impetus for looking at that? And I guess this is a bit of pilot within the Build Canada organization, but tell us about Build Toronto.
Yeah. So Build Toronto is a project of Build Canada in the same way we have other digital projects. Build Toronto is a project that is really trying to explore what can that Build Canada policy memo process look like at the local level, and is there an opportunity to kind of replicate some of that success that we had at Build Canada with putting out bold policy ideas that are more municipally focused. And actually, as I'm thinking about the types of memos that we've published a number in the last couple of weeks, sponsored by entrepreneurs living in Toronto who are very familiar with the challenges and opportunities in the city. And when I think about those memos, they are actually much more relatable at a local level. And I think that's because of the fact that municipal policy is just, it's at a layer at which most everyday individuals can understand.
The way they experience it.
It's the way they experience it. Things like, bike lanes and digital services that government is providing and how they interact with their municipal government. It's things like, we published a memo on congestion pricing. Like people can can conceptualize those ideas in a much more tangible way than, I don't know, stable coins or a federal tax structure, right?
Yeah.
So,
and you know what? That's how I think of it. You guys came out with a policy on platform edge doors. Like I think that was maybe the first one at Build Toronto, and that was something I campaigned on in the last election. But it responds to how people are feeling when there's crowding in stations on line 2 and the platform's only 2 meters wide and there's 1,000 people in there. You don't necessarily feel safe. And if we want to run tighter trains and faster, better service, like that's a safety feature that needs to be in. But if you look at the City of Toronto's approach to that, or the TTC, it's certainly expensive, that it would take us forever. And, it takes us a decade to put an elevator into a station, let alone platform edge doors. But you rightly point to other jurisdictions around the world that were able to do this far faster and for much less money.
Yeah. Yeah, and Build Toronto is being led by Eric Lombardi. He's our chair. He's our volunteer chair at Build Toronto, and I know he's got a great group of volunteers around him, and he's working really closely with many of the entrepreneurs in the city to get more of these ideas out there.
So is it always linked to an election cycle? We did Build Canada, that was federal.
Yeah.
I'm not sure when the next provincial election will be, but I guess probably within the next 4 years.
Yeah.
We have a municipal election, October 26, 2026. Is it always anchored to an election as a way to generate discussion and discourse around policies?
I mean, we have a sample size of 2 now, so Build Canada and Build Toronto. I think, I don't know what we'll do going forward, but an election cycle does provide a natural opportunity to have policy discussions and debate. It's when policymakers and elected officials and the public more generally are thinking and talking about these kinds of things. Having said that, at Build Canada, we're still publishing policy memos every couple of weeks. There is no election happening at the federal level anytime in the near future. Maybe in the medium term there will be, but we're continuing to put those ideas out there, and we're continuing to engage with policymakers on those when they want to engage. So I think it's an interesting time, and definitely for Build Toronto, I think it's a great time to put ideas out there. But I think you can still have interesting policy conversations outside of an election cycle.
What's also interesting that would sort of supersede election cycles at one level of government is the interface between the feds, the province, and the cities. And when we're talking about, housing affordability or homelessness or mental health, transit, congestion, all of these things actually often end up touching all 3 levels of government, or a solution would require the collaboration across different jurisdictions. Do you see the Build Canada and Build Toronto platform potentially evolving as a way to sort of bridge those connections, break down those silos, and proposals that might touch, I don't know, as few as 2 and maybe as many as 3 levels of government?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I think the thing about Build Canada is that it's an experiment, right? So it is, I think all of these things, whether we do or don't tie our policy memos to election cycles, or whether or not we can be a bridge between multiple different levels of government. These are all super interesting questions. And I think we're just as excited to figure out the answers to those questions as we kind of grow and evolve as an organization. I think I can't really sit here right now and tell you exactly, what we're going to look like a year from now, or what we're going to focus on, or even if we'll exist a year from now. But we're very focused on growing the movement between now, and the next year, and sort of seeing where that goes, and also seeing what that community wants us to do. Like when you start gathering a movement of thousands of people across the country, you also, at a certain point in time, have to start listening to what they want as well. So I'm really excited about the next few months to continue that growth and get a better understanding of like how we can be in service of what they want for the country as well.
Let me take it back to the short term. Right now, federal budget's coming up in a couple weeks. You guys have been putting things out and engaging on that.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking, from the growth and prosperity agenda of Build Canada, what are you guys looking to see in the budget?
Boldness.
Okay.
Yeah. If I had to summarize it in one word, it would be boldness. So we're looking for, unapologetic, bold decisions on everything from reduction in government spending to focus on innovation and growth, to, maybe some controversial policy ideas around innovation or tax credits or tax structure. Like we'd love to see some of those ideas come out in the budget. I don't know that we'll see all of those things, but this is a government that has had a narrative and rhetoric around being bold in a time of crisis, making courageous decisions, doing things very differently. And so there's been a lot of that talk over the last 6 months. And I don't think Build Canada is unique in this. I think many stakeholders across the country are looking to the budget to sort of make a bit of a determination or an evaluation as to whether or not the actions of this government are going to match the rhetoric that we've been hearing over the last 6 months.
Certainly from a comms standpoint, communication standpoint, they take every opportunity to brand it as Canada's new government.
Yeah.
So that seems like a very choice and deliberate signal to sort of indicate things are different. But I guess, put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister, I think, has billed it as both austerity and investment. Is that right? Does he say investment?
Yes.
Okay. And for some people, those things are at odds. I don't necessarily have that take. I think like there's lots of opportunities for efficiencies and also strategic investments that lead to growth. Is there anything in that idea of both austerity and investment that is resonating with folks at the Build Canada table?
Yeah, I mean, so I founded Canada Spends, as you know, and wrote a bill.
And just tell people what that is, because
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
pretty cool.
So I founded this actually before Build Canada became a thing, and we, when we launched Build Canada, we made Canada Spends a project of Build Canada, and essentially it's modeled off USA Facts and is a website and an X account that shares information about government spending in a way that just makes it more understandable for everyday Canadians who don't they're not chartered public accountants, and they don't spend their days looking at budget documents. So we've created interactive visualizations so people can sort of see in a really easy to understand way, like sort of how government collects money, what the revenue sources are, and then sort of what the expenditure sources are. So currently, if you go to canadaspends.com, you'll see that chart, and the current information in that chart is for the actual spending for fiscal year 2023 to 2024, which is the latest actual information that's publicly available. We'll be updating that with information we get when the budget is introduced, and we'll have some other analytical tools available. So that's what Canada Spends is. It's just a way to increase the level of transparency for Canadians, and to help them understand how government spends money. We've also launched provincial versions of Canada Spends. So just last week, we launched Alberta Spends, which does that at the provincial level. We will be also launching municipal versions in the coming weeks. Toronto Spends is being developed. I cannot sit here and tell you what the launch date is for that, but within the next couple of months, we'll have a version of Toronto Spends.
We will certainly share that because it's transparency around the budget. You look at the city of Toronto's $18.8 billion budget,
Yeah.
operating. It's bigger than 5 provinces. It went up by $1.8 billion last year. Taxes have gone up 25% in 3 years. And folks look around at the services that were promised to be improved. And I think in a lot of instances, they feel like we're falling up short.
Yeah.
So as a accountability measure and communicating it in a way that's easy to digest and understand, Canada Spends, and if you can land a municipal one, I think it's very, very powerful.
Yeah. But back to your question on austerity. So I wrote a Build Canada memo on creating a more productive government back in March or April. And in that memo, we recommended a number of different ways that the government could reduce spending. And to do that, we took the main estimates and went line by line and applied the principles of the 1990s program review process that the Martin Chrétien government put in place. And we went through every single budget item in the main estimates and made recommendations about reductions. And through that process, identified about $35 billion in spending that you could reduce by, I won't say doing nothing, but not like it was a pretty light touch approach to spending reductions. So one of the things that we'll be looking for at Build Canada when we see the budget is how aggressive are the spending reductions? How realistic are the spending reductions? Do we feel like the government has gone far enough in their approach to this? How bold are they? So we'll be looking at things like that. And then on the investment side, any government does have to, for sure, invest in their economy. We'll be looking for, I'm curious to see sort of how that's framed and what types of things are being invested in. It's hard to say without seeing a budget. The other thing is, and I said this in the memo and I've said it publicly before, is, I'm generally overall concerned with the level of spending of government. When you look at even the interest rates that the government of Canada is paying this year, in the latest projections, I think our interest rates, the payments on our debt are more than the health transfer to the provinces. If you fast forward with the latest PBO projections to 2030, the amount that we're paying to service our debt will exceed or be around the same amount as the total amount that the government of Canada is sending on both health and social transfers to provinces.
That's wild.
So, we also have to think about order of magnitude. And I know there's lots of people who will talk about debt to GDP ratio, and there's lots of different perspectives on, how much debt is a reasonable amount of debt for a country to have. But I think that overall quantum is important. And so I'd be looking to see, strong signals from this government that they take that issue seriously and that there's some plan in place to ensure that our debt doesn't spiral out of control.
Couple weeks, we will know what that looks like. Just in closing here, for anybody that wants to be a part of Build Canada, Build Toronto, whether entrepreneurs or policymakers or just, folks residing here in the city, how do they get involved? What is a way that they can engage, plug in, and make a contribution?
Yeah. So if you're interested in being involved, just go to buildcanada.com. And there's a sign up form right there. Put in your information. sign up, join the movement, and then you'll get an email with an invitation to join our community on Discord and a number of other ways that you can, join events and participate. So,
Well, thank you so much for coming in. I'm a huge fan of what you and the team are doing. I think it's such an important movement and initiative. And, we're seeing some traction there across different political party lines, and love to see you build it here in Toronto as well. So thanks for joining me on For the Love of TO. And anyone who is looking to get in touch with Lucy, you can find her on X at Lucy Hargreaves 4 and Build Canada at build_Canada. That's where you'll find more information. Thanks again, everybody, and see you next time.
great. Thank you.
This is For the Love of TO.